Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. So pleased to welcome back an old friend of the show and of mine, Ambassador Rick Grenell, our former ambassador to Germany and our former acting director of national intelligence. Good morning, Mr. Ambassador. Welcome back. Thank you for getting up early.
Thanks for having me, Hugh.
I want to begin by asking you, did you ever go to any of these NATO summits when you were the ambassador of the DNI?
I did. During the Trump administration, obviously, we were all about trying to convince the members of NATO to actually pay their fair share. Obligations was a big deal. And as ambassador to Germany, the largest economy in Europe, they were not paying their fair share, and they still aren't. After telling us all sorts of excuses, and so yeah, I did attend because that was a priority issue for so many ambassadors.
All right, so my first question is, President Biden skipped out on the big dinner last night, citing a big speech that he has to give today. In fact, you and I know he's 80 years old and he's tired. What do you think message that sends to NATO?
Look, I travel the world now, and I can tell you that everywhere I go, people say to me, government officials, world leaders, say to me that Joe Biden is old and he is not very good when they interact with him. He's distracted. He doesn't know who people are. They know he's not sharp. And I think the message that it sends is the United States is not sharp.
Ambassador Grenell, when you sit down with someone across the desk and they don't think you speak for your president or they don't think your president knows what he's doing or is clueless, how does that impact your ability to negotiate?
Well, first of all, I would say if someone on the other side of the table doesn't believe that you speak for the president, doesn't think that you can walk into the Oval Office and actually get something done, then they're very dismissive of you. It's not a good negotiation tactic. And we could get into the Balkans because that right there, to me, is the reason why there's so many problems in the Balkans. You can't have a State Department person in a crisis negotiating when everyone knows in that room that that person doesn't even know the president. So I think that's a real problem. But the larger issue I think that you're getting at here is when our NATO allies look at somebody like Joe Biden and they're trying to ascertain whether or not he's up to speed on all of these issues. What the message is that's sent is that you can take advantage of us and you should ask for a lot, or you should dismiss us, or you should go to, God forbid, China to try to get some sort of leadership or help. And I think that's what we're seeing around the world is that countries like Saudi Arabia are going to China. Countries in Eastern Europe are going to China. I mean, look at Germany. They still are selling cars at massive numbers into China and are completely afraid of standing up to China because the German economy is so dependent upon cars and selling cars in China. We need to have people who are pressuring the German government, pressuring NATO allies to do more, turn away from China, turn away from Huawei. Look at some of these issues right now. You have countries that are going backwards and cutting deals with Huawei and openly doing it because they know there's no consequences. And so all of the progress I think that we made with NATO countries is going backwards. I'll finish with this too. You know, Germany gets a lot of hits for not paying their fair share, but what about Canada? Canada is a member of NATO and absolutely not paying their fair share. And no one will ever be able to convince me that the Canadians can't pay.
You're right. I haven't even thought about that. I guess Poland is supposed to pick up the tab for everyone these days. Mr. Ambassador, the reason I asked you on is because there's a complicated dance going on. You know him, Secretary General Stoltenberg. I'm sure you know him pretty well. He is the NATO Secretary General. He's been very good at it. He's tired. He wants out. I think he's had 2, maybe 3 terms. And so the Brits offered up Ben Wallace, their wonderful Minister of Defense, whom you probably know as well. And Joe Biden said 9, vetoed him. So Joe Biden came up with Ursula von der Leyen, and I thought, oh, that's screwy. And you told me, no, she's good. So would you unpack the whole issue for us?
Well, first of all, I think you're right that Stoltenberg is really tired. And remember, he wanted to leave in the Trump administration, and we really convinced him to stay because he's so good and because it's hard to find a leader of NATO that understands all of the different issues. I've been wildly disappointed in NATO leadership lately because paying a priority message. It's certainly no longer a priority message for our ambassadors, and certainly not a priority message for Joe Biden. So that's too bad. But when it comes to Ursula von der Leyen, I know her quite well. She was the Minister of Defense in Germany when I was there for a short time. She and Chancellor Merkel do not agree and do not get along very well. That's why Merkel put her at defense, is because you put your German rival at defense because you know they're going to fail. They're not going to be able to get the 2%. They're not going to be able to build the military. They've got all sorts of problems, so you put them over there. But interesting enough is that Ursula is very close to Macron. And it was Macron's idea to move her into the EU job. And as soon as that happened, then you saw Chancellor Merkel pick Christine Lagarde, who Macron doesn't get along with, a French person, to run the banks in Europe. So there was this rivalry between Macron and Merkel that really played out in who they picked. And they picked the rival from opposite countries. I like Ursula. I think she's very serious. She has American kids. Some of her, I think she has 5 or 6 kids, and some of them are Americans. She was very good with Trump. She's very good with Biden. She is an incredible listener. She's articulate. I think she understands military issues, and there's no better diplomat. However, I think rewarding a German with the head of NATO is troubling to me. And Ursula aside, because I really do like her, I don't think it sends a really good message to pick somebody from a country that literally has ignored paying their obligations. Remember, the Wales Pledge in 2014 was a pledge that every member of NATO said, we're going to give ourselves 10 years. Think about that, Hugh. 10 years from 2014. That by 2024, you'll slide into 2% of your GDP being spent on military issues. And 20% of that portion will go for high technology issues. And it's just not happening in Germany. And that means the political will is not there. And that also means to me that we should not reward them with one of the most important jobs running NATO.
All right, so a personal affirmation of Van Leyen, and I don't know how to say her name, but a reservation, von der Leyen. Von der Leyen. I just share your reservation about Germany because they continue to screw us. Meanwhile, given your ambassadorial chops on all things German, what is going on in the politics of that country? I read something in the Ellis News items yesterday that the far, far, far right in Germany is advancing. Is that correct?
Look, what it is correct, but I think it's a tiny bit overblown, but it is definitely growing. Look, the problem that you have is that the CDU, which is Merkel's party, she really strangled the party because she became so moderate. And so many conservatives in Germany looked for alternative choices. And so they've become part of the AfD. It's also the reason why the Green Party in Germany has risen. The Green Party controls the Ministry of Defense right now. And the Green Party, we've got to think in America, you've got to think differently about what the Green Party in Germany means. It's really Frankfurt soccer moms. It's wealthy women, and
I didn't know that.
It's not just environmentalists, is what we would think, but it's very suburban women largely, and they care about suburban type issues. And so the Frankfurt soccer moms have really taken over and really grown this Green Party, and now they're part of the coalition government. It's a story, though, that's not being told in America because it's the damage that Merkel did to the party for her 16 years. she really ruined the conservative brand. I mean, you look at Brexit, the EU got smaller under Merkel, and I would largely blame her for not understanding the rules of immigration. Everybody wants to be generous, but if you don't have rules, you don't have borders. And that scared the British enough to leave the EU over Merkel's failure. You look at Nord Stream 2. Um, you know, how many times did Merkel look at me and say, "You don't understand the German Russian relationship. We can control the Russians, and this is about energy for us, and don't tell us what to do." Now, our position in the Trump administration was, let's put America first and say no and put sanctions on that Putin pipeline. Don't forget, Hugh, the Democrats, Senate Democrats, came in with Joe Biden and dropped those sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And if you look at some of the floor speeches from Democratic senators, they said, this is going to poke the Russians in the eye. This pipeline is inevitable. Let's not do it. Let's have consensus with our European friends. The opposite of America first is consensus with the Europeans. We saw that with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And I can argue that dropping the sanctions on Putin's pipeline led to the Ukraine war. It's the reason why we're there is because Putin said, well, if Joe Biden is going to drop these sanctions on my pipeline, he's obviously weak, and I should go finish the job in Ukraine. And I think that's troubling, and there's not enough people in the media pointing to when that weak moment happened to create this incredible war in Europe. Think about it. Europe is enthralled, engulfed in a war. And I believe that it's largely because we showed weakness and the Democrats dropped the sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline.
If you combine that with the exit from Afghanistan, I agree with you 100%. I'll be right back with Rick Grenell. Ambassador Grenell is now going to take us on a tour of the Balkans, which has become a powder keg underneath Joe Biden's non-tenure absentee presidency. Ambassador Rick Grenell, former ambassador to Germany, former acting director of the National Intelligence Department, is joining me. And it's good to have you back, Mr. Ambassador, because one of your unsung accomplishments is bringing peace to the Balkans for a period of time. I mean, aesthetically, I'm glad you put Ronald Reagan on top of the embassy in Germany, but your substantive accomplishment was bringing Serbia and Kosovo into some kind of relationship. That's fallen apart. What is happening?
Look, the Biden administration's position, their policy, is to let the Europeans lead. This is once again trying to get consensus with the Europeans rather than push our own ideas. And look no further than the Balkans. You can add it to the list of failed accomplishments around the world. And it directly goes to the fact that the White House, Joe Biden's White House, is really not paying attention. And so when I was leading these negotiations, we had 4 economic agreements, which by the way, all 4 of those economic agreements are embraced by the Biden White House. They say it's a good idea and let's implement these, but nothing is being done to implement those because it falls into the European hands. When we were there, we were talking about cutting NATO troops. Remember that there are NATO troops in Kosovo, roughly about 650, I think. We were talking about bringing that down because we were making so much progress. And by the way, if you've got NATO troops in your country, it's really difficult to attract outside investment because there's a perceived conflict. Nobody wants to grow a business in a country where you need peacekeepers. And so I thought that part of the economic agreement would be let's get rid of some of these NATO troops, get it down to almost zero. And both sides were super supportive of that. But now, Hugh, we are adding NATO troops in Kosovo. The situation is so bad. We've had no EU or US official go into the northern part of Kosovo where there's a Serb majority when there was conflict. At the height of the conflict, no one would go in, and they all were telling me that it was too dangerous, you shouldn't go in. Well, I thought that was a bunch of bunk, so I went in a couple of weeks ago. I went in without security. I was greeted People were in the streets waving to me. I met with 20 leaders. I sat down with them and explained to them why we needed to release the ethnic Albanian Kosovo police officers that had been taken. And then I had lunch, and of course, there's hard feelings, and you got to do a lot of listening, and you got to do a lot of giving context. This is why it's not good to grab 3 police officers, because honestly, the world was absolutely criticizing and pressuring the disastrous leader of Kosovo, Elvan Kurti. NATO has condemned him. Even the State Department under Anthony Blinken has condemned him as the guy who is starting this violence, who is really pushing unilaterally on these issues. And so, the Europeans are not cutting it. They're just not interested in doing the tough diplomacy of being there and listening and then pushing on these issues. And so the situation is out of control. It's a tinderbox. It's not getting better. After we got the Albanian police officers released, there should have been international condemnation and a call for an elections immediately, and there wasn't. And I got to say, if I were a Serb living in North Mitrovica, I would say to the world, we did what you said we should do. We de-escalated the situation, and you didn't do your part. You didn't come in here and talk about elections, and so you are creating instability when you lie to us. When you tell us that if we do something, then you will see pressure for the other side to do something. And I think it's terrible. I think the House and Senate, U.S. House and Senate, the oversight committees are not doing their job. They're not holding the Biden administration to account. Where are these tough hearings? I'm hearing that
Mr. Ambassador, you're too young to remember 1979 the way I do. But I got that feeling. I got that 1979 feeling again, where the Cubans are all over Africa and the Soviets are lining up to go into Afghanistan. Is that the feeling you have about? I mean, we don't have a White House. We got no president, in essence, just like 1979. Is that how you feel right now about the world?
I feel like there's not a single place in the world that is better off under Joe Biden. You tell me where, and I would be able to argue that the situation is worse. I mean, if I would have been sitting here with you a couple years ago to say that the Biden administration is going to remove the Houthis from the terrorist watch list, and that then from Yemen they're going to launch missiles into the UAE at Abu Dhabi and Dubai, you would call me crazy. But that actually happened under the Biden administration, and our collective political response in Washington, D.C. was, don't look at this. We've got a media that are completely disinterested in the failures. I was watching the NATO coverage, and it was atrocious. Nobody was bringing up the fact that 8 out of 31 members pay their 2%. 8 out of 31. And now you want to talk about adding another country to the American people's budget to watch over. Listen, no new members of NATO when the current ones aren't paying their bills. Don't do that to the American tax.
Well put. Rick Grenell, it is great to see you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for getting up early. I really do appreciate it. He's way out on the West Coast, but he is always a stalwart for freedom. Rick Grenell, listen to him.